We lived in that, but 2 days ago, I was going to the dentist. I have a 10 o'clock appointment. I'm coming up Marine Drive. They close off one entire lane just through the Mooney to do the bush cutting in the middle of the road. They block it off right before the stoplight and no signs, nothing. So you got 3 lanes of traffic at the stoplight and now you got them all merging. It took forever to get just up to the dentist office. Same thing on the way back down, 3 hours later, they're on the other side, did the same thing. Yeah. It took me like a half an hour. Yeah.
But you're, I mean, it's just one lane all the way, so when you drive from Santa Rita, it's.
Yeah, and it's after work, so it isn't too bad.
Oh,
So
okay.
you don't have the naval station traffic, yeah.
They're ready.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I call the April Guam Board of Accountancy meeting to order. Before we begin, we'll just go ahead and confirm that this meeting was properly noticed, and I'm looking
17th and 22nd. Yep.
Okay, so it's
2 ads.
2 ads, so it's properly noticed, so we can begin. Present are board members, Sean Phillips, Jenny Chu, myself, and then participating virtually are board members Francis Baba and Taling Taitano, and Executive Director Dave Sanford. So first item on the agenda is the minutes from last meeting, which was the March meeting, and we have it in our materials.
Yep.
So please review.
Move to approve, subject to correction.
Okay.
Second.
Second by Francis, thank you. So minutes approved from the March meeting. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Dave, you want to go ahead and do old business?
Sure. Really dumb.
Yeah, for that date, okay.
You look past the minutes there, and the first page is the summary page. The fund was up to 5.6 million as of the end of March, and then it well, no, as of the January, but it's down to 5.379 million as of April 21st. So it's down a couple hundred grand over the 3 weeks, but then April 23rd, the market went back up another 1,000 points, and then it went back up another 400 points yesterday. So that means it's back up by another 150,000 or so. It just kind of demonstrates the volatility of the market. But basically we're good with the 5.3, 5.6. If you look at the first page of the March statement, which is on the next page, you'll see that we started the year with 5.541 million, and then at the end of March it was 5.669, and then we're up and down. But look over the time weighted performance, the annualized since 2015 is 6.21%. And that's just to recognize from the standpoint at this point in time, it's 10 years since we created this fund. And the board has actually contributed to $4,775,000. And we have a 5.3 to 5.6 million balance. So that's about 600, actually about 800,000 to the good. And over the contribution, and then you look at, we've probably spent about 400,000 or so over the last 10 years. It took a few years to get started. 5 or 6 years, we spent about 400,000 in the visiting professor program. Okay. So having spent the 400,000, and we're up to 800, so we've really earned pretty good. And our 20-year investment target was 6% annual average growth. I think we're doing fine.
Okay.
And maybe another 10 years we'll have it big enough to start hiring people full time or whatever.
Oh.
Whatever is necessary at the time, depending on what the future of education is. But I think the fund is off to a good start, and we're in a good position to keep contributing at this point.
When was our last contribution?
Actually in March, February,
It was
March.
200,
contributed
right?
the 200.
And then we lost 200 in market fluctuation.
Yeah, and then it's back up again.
Yeah, back up again. Okay,
Yeah. So that's basically the report for the fund at this.
when was our last contribution?
Actually in March, February,
It
March.
was 200, right?
contributed the 200.
And then we lost 2.
Not sure what's doing that. Okay,
Then we have the training this Friday, tomorrow.
yeah, we have the free half-day CPE training for everybody tomorrow from Dr. Conrad, which was part of his commitment to the previous last year he spent in the visiting professor program. So we have that tomorrow, and then I know that the dean had invited someone from Gonzaga University to be visiting professor for the summer, and it turned out he has some personal issues. He couldn't make it this summer. So he recommended a colleague of his who's interested. I think they're talking with Martha
For this summer.
and with the dean about supporting the program this summer. So I don't know what the outcome's gonna be yet, but I know they're talking, this person is talking to, I forget his name. He's talking to the dean and Martha about participating in the summer program.
Wait tomorrow to have that training.
Okay. Why did we need Trace help again?
I wanted to let us know when we leave, just to make sure our internet does not.
Well,
But it was our internet, that's why we needed to call him.
Are you attending the training tomorrow?
Yeah. How about you?
No, like, I got April, this is the worst time. I got April 30 deadlines and I can't. 4 hours is, I want to, but.
maybe that's why they need to mute the one in there. Okay.
How's attendance so far for tomorrow?
Well, last I looked, it's probably about 45.
Oh, so a lot more.
Also less than the previous.
Yeah, I mean, previously we had the 80s.
80,
people.
Might be the subject.
The fair
Well,
value.
yeah, I think so, because a lot of the previous attendees were from Guam agencies that really didn't have a whole lot to do with the subject matter being discussed. And I think they finally realized that. It
I
wasn't.
think also, the AGA just had a 24 hours worth of CPE that a lot of people went to.
Oh, that's
So
right.
Well,
That might have been a factor.
Well, yeah, that's a big part of the AGA people, I guess. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, but this is free.
Yeah. Yeah, usually everybody comes if it's free, even just for the refreshment drink.
Yeah, okay. Darling, are you going tomorrow?
I have a call that I can't get out of. Yeah.
All right.
So that's where that stands.
Okay, so next item is you gave
New
the new licensees.
We have a lot of people from India,
Interesting, India.
you know, India's coming up in the world, they're negotiating good tariff deals here.
Yeah.
What I hear anyway. But you know, it's the usual mix, all of Asia, India. Taiwan, you know, Japan. Have some Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Middle East, yeah, we usually get Middle Eastern.
Nobody from Guam.
No, not this time. But we do have a couple of reinstatements and, I think it's typically it's a function of people finding that, their licenses have gone delinquent or inactive or canceled on the CPA verify, so they contact us and say, hey, I found my license canceled. Well, you know, but we didn't hear from you. You have to renew. So, but all total, we have 63. And most of those are new. There's 2 or 3 reinstatements.
Did it pay for all the years of renewal that lasts?
What we do is we make them, well, if they're lapsed more than 3 years, we cancel them. And at that point, they have to pay for a reinstatement, which is $275. It's
But it's
almost,
still less than
it's,
paying for all the last year's.
yeah, right, we won't pay them, but it's almost,
That's nice.
it's equivalent to almost 3 years worth of fees.
2 years.
Yeah, for the $100 a year.
Once it's canceled.
Yeah,
It's 3 years.
once it's canceled, you have to apply as a reinstatement.
bad.
So you pay the reinstatement fee and you also have to go to the 3 years worth of CPE.
Yeah, that 120.
Yeah. So it seems to work. So, don't have any issues with these.
Okay. That's good.
Move to
There's-
approve?
Can I hear a second? Second by Sean, thank you. The licenses and certifications are approved.
So then we can move on to
What's next? The peer review?
peer review compliance. I put this in mostly for, information purposes, just for the record. But I thought we might as well, wade through a little bit of it. This is best practices for deficient peer review reports. It's something that, the AICPA and NASBA peer review people came up with because they're concerned about people not knowing what to do when they get a deficiency or, a pass with deficiencies or a failure. So this is essentially what they recommend.
Oh, Dave, sorry, silly question probably, but what do we do? I mean, or have we had any in the past?
Well,
And what do we do?
We only have 2 firms that need.
I know, but I
And they
think
both pass.
we used to have like 3 or 4.
Yeah,
Just wondering.
we've never really had any that.
With past
had
deficiencies, and
no,
so
no.
we didn't have to go through that, because this
yeah.
sounds like. It sounds like companies or boards receive pass with deficiencies and they don't know what to do with
There's
it.
a lot of them in the States, yeah.
In the States, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but you're talking about jurisdictions that have 20,000 firms and
Yeah.
licenses, I mean. We get the monthly, information from the AICPA about, firms that have been dropped from peer review,
Yeah,
firms,
okay.
firms that were disciplined, firms that, or have some kind of issues and things like that. Then we also have the website to look
Okay.
at, but. We've really never had a local firm, we've never had a local firm that had any issues
Okay.
with peer review.
So, I mean, just for the record here, because, Jenny and I are on the one
Yeah.
big 4 firm here that
Yeah.
if, when all the firms who are licensed here submit their peer reviews, if it can just go straight to other board members instead of us. Just to.
Actually, it doesn't go to anybody.
Everybody, okay,
Only goes to
okay.
me.
Okay, so
Yeah.
just for the record that it doesn't
The
go straight to an entity
Jessica
or.
handles it, and then
Okay.
if there's any issue, then I look at it, but otherwise it just goes to her and goes to the file. As
Okay,
long as it's a pass.
okay,
And it's, we can access it, the board staff can access it on the, there's a website. Then the AICPA makes available, and then, even with like the PCOB reports, we can access.
okay,
But it's strictly, it's a secured access site,
Okay.
and it's only for board staff.
so if there's an issue, you would at least report it to one of the board members, whoever's in charge of the.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
we'd have to do something in
Okay.
terms of a disciplinary, if anybody
Okay.
ever had any issues, but we get the letters, I mean, it's like the EY and Deloitte, well, half the firms in the states that are licensed have the CPE cheating thing, right?
Yeah,
We get letters, but our policy as a jurisdiction is that we don't pile on to other jurisdictions.
Okay.
Disciplinary actions. We only react directly if it's an action that occurred in our jurisdiction.
okay,
There are some jurisdictions, there's a handful of them that are lying, just kind of like, stalking the disciplinary actions, so.
yeah,
If a firm in New York or New Jersey gets disciplined for something and they have a license and that the other jurisdiction piles on and says, oh, you were reprimanded and that means you did this, blah, 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 we're gonna fine you an extra $10,000. They
Okay.
do stuff like that. There's a few that do that. And, we just don't do that. Most jurisdictions don't. We consider it piling on.
Okay.
If it happens in our jurisdiction, then we take direct disciplinary action.
okay,
We would. that we have, but
Okay.
otherwise we don't pile on to the other things. We get the notices and the letters. If they have a license here, they give us the notices. And we keep track of them and file them, but as long as they're not actively practicing here, we don't follow up in terms of piling on to the
Yeah, okay.
disciplinary action.
Okay, but yeah, I just wanted to just reconfirm that if there's any issues with any of our licensees, firm licensees that, you know, to avoid any conflicts.
Oh, yeah,
Doesn't-
well,
doesn't
no,
come
yeah,
to-
yeah, I guess I'm in charge of that, and I was
Just for the record.
well, for the record, I was also put in charge of the ethics committee of the Guam Society of CPA, so I get all the ethics complaints also.
Okay.
Simply because of the fact that I was the board executive director and I'm gonna get them anyway, so they figured I should just deal with all of
Yeah,
it.
okay.
So I'm the only one that gets any of the complaints, even from the society people and everything. And so far, we haven't had anything that we needed to publicly disclose or discipline anybody for. The few disciplinary actions we've had in the past, you know, were just individuals that did things they should not have done.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, this is basically the review here. I just kind of highlighted some of the, you know, recommendations here. So, you know, and most of it's repetitive once you read the first set of it, which is basically best practices are intended for firms that receive a pass with deficiency or fail. And if it's the first time, you know, with less than a pass rating, or if it's consecutive, then there's subsequent things you'll do. But they talk about with pass with deficiencies or fail, the board monitoring can include these things. Reviewing the reports, letters of response, monitor the compliance with corrective actions, et cetera, et cetera. And for non-compliance monitoring, if they're not in compliance, then we could issue warning letters, things like that. So they're basically trying to advise the boards and the firms how to react if you get a pass with deficiencies or a fail. From our perspective of the board, the only thing that really matters is if you pass, you're okay. If you get a deficiency, then we would look at the deficiency and say, what is it? What are you doing to correct it? You know, then if you typically the peer review process will give you some corrective action, and then we just look to see if you're following that. If you are, fine. If you're not, then we can follow up with disciplinary action. So, but this is just kind of the best practices overall, I think, to explain it, because there's just a lot of firms, and I think part of what's happening is that, you know, with all the things that happened during COVID, and people started doing things that some people started doing things they probably shouldn't be doing in terms of audits of some of these small grants and stuff like that. And that's one of the things that's affected a lot of this, more than anything. So, if you get a pass with deficiencies and then subsequently you get a fail rating, then you got a real problem. And in that sense, we could start looking to see if we want to tell you that you, and typically the corrective action is if you're doing audits, essentially, which is why you need a peer review, and you get a pass with deficiencies, and then you go through the process and they give you corrective actions, and then you have another peer review, which is usually in less than 3 years. You don't wait 3 years with a pass. You do another one a year or maybe 18 months later and determine if the firm is in compliance or not. And if you're in compliance, that's one thing. If you're not complying and then you get another review and you fail, then it's time to say, maybe you should stop doing what you're doing. We could suspend your license to provide those services for a period of time, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, then look at whether you're going to clean up your act or not, or whether you just need to stop doing it altogether. And there are a lot of times with firms that I've seen, you have a pass with deficiencies, they don't clean up their act, they get a fail. They still don't clean up their act, and they, you know, don't comply with the process. They don't answer, you know, questions, things like that. then basically they get dropped from peer review and from a board standpoint, their licenses are suspended. From providing those services. Maybe not everything, but at least in terms of the test services, so, you know, if you can't pass a peer review, you shouldn't be providing the test services, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so. That's basically what this is, it's the best practices, kind of a handbook, I guess, for a lot of the other boards. The other reason they put this together is that, out of the 55 jurisdictions, there's probably close to 30 boards that have new, board directors or staff. In the past 5 years, I'm sure there's at least 25 of them, if not 30 of them, that have new people that have never really been through some of the processes, so. I think that's part of it also.
And a firm like one that does compilations is subject to peer review.
Yep.
It should be.
Yeah.
But I was, good thing you brought that up. I had someone ask me a question, I'm supposed to ask you. What type of peer review? So if you're only doing compilations, is it just a desk review? Do you still need a full systems review? What level of peer review?
It depends, you submit your, you know, samples of your work or whatever. But
Okay.
typically, with compilations, at this point, they're looking at the desk or even just a system review, but depending on the level of work involved, they've actually relaxed some of the requirements so that it
Okay.
can be done remotely. So
What if you're also doing reviews? Will it require
no,
the
if you're
same
doing
level?
reviews, you need a higher level.
So it's the same level of, okay, well, that's, okay.
Yeah, when you get to the reviews, I think, at least everything I've seen from a review standpoint, unless it's recent,
Okay,
you actually need the full review.
okay,
And, you know, the issue is that part of the review can be done remotely, but then if you're doing reviews and audits, then some of it has to be done, on site.
on-site, right,
There's,
okay,
there's a certain amount, not all of it, but, they can do some of the systems review on a remote basis, but,
Okay.
then some of the other work has to be done on site.
yeah, because there are some sole practitioners here that, you know, we're trying to encourage them to do review,
Right. Yeah.
but they don't want to go. They're asking if, do they need the same level of peer review as a regular audit firm?
That, and it depends on, you know, what level of work they're doing,
Okay.
or what level of work they're capable of doing, is then they're gonna have to go do some CPE and stuff
Yeah,
to be sure that if they do it, they're gonna pass their peer review, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Also, they have to come up to speed with the system, and that's
Yeah.
when the new system and the, what is it, the, quality assurance standards.
yes, well, that's
For your
coming up, so
system.
that's gonna be
Yeah.
even more problematic for those wanting to do.
That's exactly right, that's why most of, when I talk to people, they're like, well, you know, there's. We don't have enough employees to get enough work to cover the cost of getting prepared to do it. That's the bottom line, that's what they're looking at, and especially from a risk standpoint, that's why most of them don't do it, so.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, they say that they make it easier in some respects, but then when they add on the quality control standards and everything else, and then you gotta have peer review. And that's why you don't find hardly anybody doing the federal stuff, because then you gotta have the governmental peer review too, you know?
the question I get most often is, if you issue a compilation, if you do compilations, do you still need a peer review? And I've been saying generally, yes. I leave it as that.
Yeah, you're right.
Do the quality control standards apply if you're just doing compilations?
It's crazy, right?
I have to look.
Yeah.
I have to look.
I don't recall.
That one I can't recall.
Yeah.
That's the newer standard. I have to read it again, but I haven't ingrained it yet.
Yeah.
But
I mean, even if
I
you're
mean-
just doing reviews, you have to wonder, is it even worth it if you have to
Yeah.
The
comply?
level of overhead that you gotta consider,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
yeah, it's, the whole thing. I mean, well, it's, It's that, but it's also the CPE stuff, because in certain instances, if you're doing certain things. You have to have a certain amount of a certain type of CPE, you can't just have CPE.
Well, maybe the AICPA has something where it says, okay, this is what you can do. Follow this program and this can serve as your
Yeah.
QSM, what is it called?
Have some sort, yeah.
QAS.
Yeah.
Quality
A model
assurance
template.
services, yeah.
Yeah, and say this is,
Put this in
follow
place.
these and then this,
Yeah,
this serves
Yeah,
as
there's
evidence of your
some-
quality control.
Yeah, there's some framework type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but,
I've seen some tools sort of
Yeah.
advertised,
there's
and use this tool to comply.
If you go on the ICBA websites, they have, if you belong to the firm section, private practice,
Yeah.
stuff like that. They have, toolkits that
Yeah.
you can download and whatever, and it gives you all this
Your
documentation.
toolkits, right, okay.
But it's still something you gotta spend time on.
Yeah.
Say your generator.
Power and to go on. Yeah, the generator run the building. All about the air con. Sometimes it blows out the air con.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that's an issue, and I don't know how we're gonna get more people. I did have one person come from Hawaii. I had lunch with the other day. He had a firm in Hawaii. He'd been there a long time. He retired from it, sold it. And then he got bored at home and he started up a new firm that's just him. And he's doing some review type. But he's only doing it because the people he was connected with do bonding. And they bond a lot of contractors here. And they ask him to come do the work for them. So he's like, oh, okay, so what I have to do, so he came and asked, signed up for whatever he has to do. Carlton,
Williams.
yeah. Yeah, I've known him for a long time, since we were on council before he was on the ICPA council, but I said, well, there's a lot of work here, he's like, no, I don't wanna do a lot of work, I'm already doing more than I wanted to do. He said, I just plan to do basic work for myself, and these guys called me and said, oh, you're in business, da, da, da. He's like, now I'm more busy than I wanna be. Well, back to life.
Yeah. You stop by your office.
Yeah, he told me he was gonna see you. Okay, any questions? Let me know. Okay. We can move on to the legislative update. John Johnson's been a busy camper this year. Pulling his hair out, trying to keep track of everything. So this was the year that the straw broke the camel's back and every jurisdiction decided they needed to do their own thing. So UAA, Uniform Accountancy Act, is now gonna have about 39 versions of the Uniform Accountancy Act enacted. I just thought I'd throw this in for a recap of where everybody stands. I mean, we know that we went to the 150 hours in 2016 and it took effect in 2021. So it's been 4 years since we required the 150 hours. Due to the downturn in applicants and the shrinking of the pipeline, et cetera, that we've all heard about for the last 2 or 3 years. Everybody started on what do we do to make more CPAs available, and everybody finally got around to arguing about the bachelor's in 2 years experience versus master's in 1 year's experience, and is there any real difference? And frankly, nobody has any empirical evidence that there is. On top of that, they argued about what about the jurisdictions and then what about mobility and all these things. So this kind of lays out just where the things stand in terms of being in progress, because all of this is legislation in progress and only 1 or 2 things have been passed. Everything else is still in progress and we don't have any idea how it's going to actually turn out. Because of course it's a legislature and you have no idea what they do until they vote. But so far the 24 states have filed legislation that involves pathways and or mobility legislation. Texas broke it into two separate bills. Oregon has two bills, one for pathways and the other was pathways and mobility. Of the 24 states, 18 included pathways and mobility in the same legislation, and that's Texas, Ohio, Utah, Virginia, Florida, Oregon, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Georgia, Illinois, New Mexico, Tennessee, Iowa, Minnesota, Connecticut, California, Arkansas, and New York. That's a good chunk because you've got California and New York and Texas and Illinois, which in terms of applicants and candidates for the CPA exam are the top four besides us. You know, we're number 5 typically, and those are the top 4. So that's a huge chunk of the profession in terms of the entire United States, domestically anyway. 5 states address the pathway only, meaning, you know, the degree versus number of hours required, that kind of thing, and experience. Nothing to do with mobility. And that was Indiana, Hawaii, Montana, North Carolina, and Nevada. And the legislation filed in Montana doesn't directly affect pathways, but it says the board has the ability to waive education and or experience by rule of law, but that was cut off. And then Maryland addressed mobility only. And there's some nuances to the mobility thing. The 23 states that addressed pathways, 22 of them said they basically included a BA degree with concentration in accounting plus 2 years of experience as determined by the board. And that's basically what we had before we went to the 150 requirement. And then 11 of the 22 removed the 150-hour requirement. Ohio, Utah, Virginia, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Alaska, Illinois, Minnesota, and California, and New Mexico. But note that California, Illinois, and Minnesota removed the 150 in 2029 and 2030 respectively. So not for 3 years, it's 3 to 4 years from now, which essentially gives them enough time to figure out whether they're going to leave that in the law or maybe repeal it in the meantime, depending on what happens. So they're hedging their bets. And then, well, 5 of the 11, Virginia, Massachusetts, Hawaii, South Carolina, and New Mexico, added back a BA plus 30-hour pathway, meaning you could have a BA degree with 150 hours of education and still get licensed without the 2 years experience. So it kind of is and isn't there. And the other 11 retained the 150-hour requirement. So of the 18 states that address mobility, the guardrails, which they talk about guardrails, meaning are you competent to come from that state to our state to practice? The guardrails require passage of the exam to meeting requirements for initial licensure. So, and the wording's all over the place. So the biggest issue to me out of all of this is mobility, from the standpoint that we want to be sure that our Guam licensees are able to go to the States and practice from a mobility standpoint. And I think if we stick with what we have now, there's no question about that, because it fulfills everything. You know, it's the higher level, and that's why these people are moving back to what could be considered a lower level, but empirically from evidence, there is none that says it's lower level. There's nothing that says it's lower or equivalent. And by the same token, like I've argued in the meetings with NASBA and AICPA, and there's no one jurisdiction that can stand up and say, here's our requirements. We make better CPAs, and our CPAs are better than your CPAs because we have less disciplinary actions, and we have less this, or we have less that, or we have better protection of the public. There's not one jurisdiction that can stand up and say that as compared to any other jurisdiction out of the 55. I don't think there's going to be any major overall impact in terms of can our CPAs go anywhere if we stick with what we have? There are some jurisdictions and there's some jurisdictions that have board members that feel like, well, if you don't pass it our way, we shouldn't let you come, but I don't think that'll ever hold up overall, because I don't think anybody can ultimately provide any evidence of the fact that their quote pathway is better or worse. And it's been since 1982 or 83 since the 150-hour requirement started in Florida. And to this date, there is no empirical evidence that shows that it makes any real difference other than some people pass the exam more than others. But even if you look at that in terms of, well, 150 hours of education means they're more educated and they're better prepared and they pass the exam. They make higher scores. A few of them do, but a lot of them don't. And we have approximately 40% of our candidates that are in the pre-education completion program, which means they have not completed their education yet. Although several of them have passed the entire exam, and most of the ones that have already taken sections of the exam have grades that are within 1 point of the grade average. Our average grade is within 1 point of the average grade of all these jurisdictions that have nothing but 150 hours complete, so with master's degrees. So, and out of the Elijah Watts Sells awardees, about a third of them are CPAs with bachelor's degrees and 2 years experience. So I don't think there's any way that anybody can ultimately stand up and say one's better or worse than the other. People are people, no matter where you go.
So is NASRA working on drafting a new model accountancy?
There is an exposure draft out that has suggested UAA language to address this pathway and mobility issue, and it's very vague.
So are they
Very
essentially
non-specific.
leaving it up to the
They're
jurisdictions to?
they're trying to appease both, and it's not just NASBA, it's NASBA and AICPA. I mean, AICPA wanted competency. Let's just do competency, but there's no effective way to do that. At this point, they can't figure out how to do that effectively. All that stuff they wrote up in that exposure draft that all but 2 jurisdictions said, yeah, we think it's a good idea, but that's not how to do it. Yeah. So this is their fallback, if you will, position to providing a third pathway, and they've modified the UAA language to include the quote third pathway, which is essentially a bachelor's degree with 2 years of education, but one year can be regular and or 2 years experience, but 1 year is just regular experience and the other year is experience oriented towards the competency, but there's no method of determining how that is measured. So, but that's quote unquote the third pathways. So
And
essentially,
that's the component that a CPA has to sort of attest to or.
all that, that's what they
verify
were
or-
asking about, but
Yeah,
but they left all that out. They just said that this is and we think that 1 year should focus on these competencies.
so I thought there was still a verification component. Of
Not
some sort by a
not in the
CPA.
revised language. The only verification that's included in the revised language that I'm aware of is the standard, somebody has to sign off on
Yeah,
your
that's,
experience.
yeah,
But not in terms of the detail that was
Yeah,
in the
right.
exposure draft.
Yeah.
That's not there.
right.
Yeah, an actively licensed US CPA still has to sign off on the experience.
Yeah,
Just sign off, I mean, when they sign off, they're basically attesting.
Verifying that you had,
Yeah.
you your experience was real. You didn't lie.
And whatever he's saying is,
Yeah.
or he or she's saying is there, okay.
Did they
So we're trying to
verify?
make it as objective as possible
Right,
versus
yeah.
subjective.
Yeah, it was so subjective before it's pitiful, so. Yeah, so, so the exposure draft out is that there's revised UAA language. And they're asking for comments and I don't really see any need to comment on it because it's just gonna be what it is. And I don't see that any of these people are actually using it. So they're all just kind of doing their own thing. And again, this is what's going on, but this is all proposed legislation that's in progress.
So what should we be sort of telling the students at UOG?
I think
About-
we tell them to hang in there and do what they've been doing.
Because they're coming to us, some are asking, do I need 150 hours? Should I get 150 hours? Should I take the MAC program? What should we do? You know, with this coming down the pipeline. It's hard to tell people
There
what
is
to
no
do.
should, I mean, if the board decides they want to remove the 150-hour requirement and go with the same thing we had before, which was a master's in 1 year of experience. Or a bachelor's in 2 years, a master's meaning a master's or 150 hours. If you had 150 hours of education, you only need 1 year of experience. Or the
Yeah.
bachelor and 2 years experience. We could do that, I mean, the board could decide to
Yeah.
do that. And then we basically are back to. Basically what all of this is, that's basically what the
Yeah.
UAA revised language says.
Right.
So we should, eventually come up with some decision.
Yeah, we can decide if we want to, but I'm thinking that I'm still in the process of rewriting our stuff because every time I sit down and do something, it changes. It's been changing almost quarterly for the last 2 years. But I'm thinking at this point that we should probably see, I mean, we can wait a year and see how some of this stuff is
I
gonna.
mean, that's what
shake
I've been
out.
saying in some of the Western meetings and
Yeah,
that. Right now for Guam, we wanna wait and see what the other states are doing, but I think because it's moving pretty quickly. I think we should start having discussions among ourselves, what we think we want, what direction we wanna head into. Do you wanna go back to just the bachelor's with 2 years experience, and if it is 2 years experience, what type of experience, we wanna see what other states are requiring.
yeah, there's no, in all of the things that I've seen so far, there's no specificity in terms of experience has to be public or private or
Yeah.
whatever. They still follow the standard, anything goes experience wise. So my only concern is like I said, being sure that our licensees are qualified from a mobility standpoint to go practice in the States or anywhere else they want to go. Because that's to me is the key. And at this point, if we stick to what we have with the 150, then nobody can argue that they wouldn't be. Now, once we see how some of this stuff is gonna shake out and what the result is gonna be, and then I think we'll be in a better position to determine whether we want to actually relax to 150 or not.
Because there are people on island that are not taking the exam because they haven't reached the 150 hours.
Right.
We wanna tell them to take the exam, but then they're hesitant because they're thinking that maybe it won't be needed anymore.
Yeah, well, that's a fact of life.
Yeah.
Things change and sometimes you have to deal with it. It's like, I couldn't drink until I was 21 and the week before I turned 21, they changed the law to 18. Hello.
So I'm curious what
Nothing you can do about it, just the way it is.
I'm curious what's going on with the jazz meetings, what they're telling what UOG is telling them.
I don't think UOG's telling me anything.
Anything, okay.
At this point, at least not to my knowledge. Nobody's asked me. So. And I think that, I still think the overriding factor to me is mobility, and if we at least have a standard that ensures that our licensees can go to the States and do their thing, then I think that's where we're better off at this point. once we understand what's gonna be required, then if we do relax it, and some states say that you can't come unless you have 150 hours, blah, blah, blah. Then we relax our 150-hour requirement. Then we need to make sure that we put candidates for licensure and notice that if you go that route, you may not be able to go practice in that jurisdiction.
Could they then just take the credits
Well,
subsequent and still qualify?
that's the thing, and that's where you run into board members who say, if you don't complete all your education before you sit for the exam, you shouldn't come to our state. What difference does it make? How about the guy who has no education and sits down and passes your exam, you know, is he any less qualified than everybody else who passed it?
Yeah,
You
okay,
know, and how do you argue that, you know?
okay,
But there are people who think like that, so. There are boards who think like that, so we have to be cognizant of, you know, just the fact that it's there.
okay. I mean, because these are relevant questions being asked.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're getting people from other countries that come here that don't have obviously the 150. And they
Yeah,
want to
well,
sit for the exam.
Well, that's true, but in a lot of cases, most of our candidates already have the 150. Most of the foreign ones, other than maybe the
Well,
Philippines.
those are the candidates sitting for
Yeah.
the exam, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about the ones that are coming here to work.
I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
and you know, some of them
Because
don't.
it's the other countries that have the stricter
Yeah.
requirements, so, you know, but, yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think there's any difference between a bachelor's degree or equivalent in 2 years' experience and a master's degree in 1 year. I actually prefer the 2 year experience pathway because to me, another year of experience doing the work, dealing with customers and
Yeah.
dealing with coworkers and dealing with issues is much more valuable than another year worth of,
Yeah.
1 year of sitting in the classroom.
You know, I think from protecting the public. You know, those accountants or auditors or whoever's here that are
Yeah,
working here, we want them to sit for the exam and become CPAs. And in other words, we should try and do what. I mean, what's best for them to become CPAs. I mean, the more CPAs we have on island, the better, right?
Absolutely.
For the people that are working here.
Yeah, I just don't wanna get into the position of having them, licensed to work here and then being told they can't go anywhere else, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of them do go off island.
Yeah, so. You know, that to me is the only real issue, but I'm definitely in favor of going with the bachelor's degree and 2 years of experience, much more so.
Okay,
And if I had my druthers, I'd make the experience public accounting experience, because that's where you really learn. I mean, that's where you really learn most of the issues, how to handle it.
yeah, you do, and you develop the research skills, things, yeah.
Yeah, and well, you face the issues you're gonna face for a long time to come, you know?
Okay,
Working in certain environments, you never get that experience. You'll never get that experience.
so let's at least probably try to come up with some consensus this year, right, before the end of the year. Because I think we'll get more feedback from the other states.
Well, I think we'll get some feedback in the regional meetings, and, you know, discussing all of this, I'm sure, and then, maybe there'll have been some progress.
Yeah.
On how this is going, and then we need to get, I think by the annual meeting in October, we'll have feedback on the UAA exposure draft,
Okay,
because that's due
Yeah, so
sometime in May.
Consensus should be reflected in that
And
final.
that final exposure
Right.
draft response, because the responses are due, I think, in the first couple of weeks of May. And the plan is to discuss those in the regional meetings in June. And then probably issue a response or a final
Okay.
draft. For consideration in the annual meeting in October. Yeah,
okay,
okay, so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up, but, and just everybody on notice is that this is how much of a mishmash we have at this point.
a lot of colors, a lot of different colors.
And John's pulling his hair out, he'll be bald by the annual meeting. Yeah. Okay. We go to the financial statement, so we've completed our 6 months now. And, I think our revenues are on track to come out somewhere between 750 and 800,000 overall.
Okay, so much higher than budget.
Yeah, this budget was still, lower because we anticipated still that there would be some lag in exam applicants because of the new exam and the new discipline sections and all that kind of stuff. But, somehow, AICPA got enough people to basically verify some of the scores they have, so the applicants just kept coming, so. And even at this point, you can see in this chart here, where even for March, our applicants are up a little bit. Holding steady and the sections are up, so, people are taking the exam much more so than we thought. The issue was having score holds that were gonna be 6 weeks to 8 weeks long, which meant you couldn't retake that section until you got your score, which we thought would push things out, but apparently it didn't, and they got faster with their score releases than they ever thought they would. So, but I'm thinking that overall we'll come out somewhere around 750, 800,000. And expense wise, we're, holding steady as usual. If you take out our 200,000 contribution, we're at 182,000, which would put us basically at 365 total. And well, as the 182, so. But the 153, will be at the 316, and then we got dues and things that are gonna come due, but I think we'll probably be somewhere in the maybe 550 range, 600. Would definitely be under.
Did we make a contribution to UOG this year yet? Are we
Yes,
planning
ma'am,
to?
We did
Okay.
last month.
Okay.
It's reflected, I think, in the March financial statement. But
Oh, is that the
you know,
200? Is that the 200?
Yeah, that's the 200 here that you're seeing, the contribution here.
Okay.
And that 200 brings our total contribution to 4,775,000 in the last 10 years, since 2015, when we created the fund.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's generated a little bit of income. Anyway, yeah, if you take out the 200 contribution, then basically we're 116,000 excess revenues at this point. And I'm pretty sure we'll be holding just about there, or right.
And most of the licensing happens in June.
Most of it's gonna happen in the next 2 months. It's
Yeah.
already picking up. I'm getting 2 or 3 a day now. And then in May, we'll get a lot more, and then June we'll be, very busy. So, yeah. I'm fully expecting to reach the 360 on the individual licensing. That's not an issue. The certification fees continue to roll, and the application fees, I'm sure, are gonna exceed the 195,000. Because we just continue to get applicants for the exam. I think that, if you go back and look at the pipeline issues over the last 50, 60 years, it kind of rolls in a wave that follows the economy. The waves of applicants increase as the economy decreases, and things get harder and expenses get tighter. More people look to improving their accounting, et cetera, et cetera. More people go into accounting because they know that that's a job that always is in demand. And it's more in demand when the economy's tightened. So I think if you really look at it, you'll see over the last 2 years that the enrollments are up and everything else in accounting programs, simply because the economy has gone down like that. And if you look back in history, I think you'll find that wave rolls right along the trough of the.
Is there any news about the test center? Did I miss that, or is UOG?